wind had teeth, and it was biting hard across the plains of Wyoming. It stripped the last of the warmth from the failing sun, which bled a weak orange glow across the horizon before sinking behind the jagged line of the mountains. Snow, fine and sharp as sand, scoured the frozen earth, piling in drifts against the skeletal remains of last summer's sagebrush. It was a land of bone white and shadow blue, a place that had long forgotten the mercy of green. Eli Beckett felt the cold deep in his bones. He pulled the collar of his sheepskin coat tighter around his neck, the rough wool scratching against his beard. His horse, a sturdy buckskin named Jupiter, snorted a plume of steam into the air, its ears flicking against the endless whine of the wind. They were heading back to the cabin after fixing a section of fence that a fallen tree had snapped like a matchstick. The job had taken longer than planned, and now dusk was closing in fast, turning the vast emptiness into something uneasy and strange. His life had become a rhythm of mending what broke, tending what lived, and enduring what could not be changed. It was a solitary existence, carved from a land that gave little and took much. The silence was his most constant companion, so familiar he no longer noticed it, until that evening. Something broke it. It wasn't a sound, but a sight. A smudge of darkness against the white snow near the half-frozen creek on the southern edge of his land. He reined Jupiter to a stop, squinting. Probably a dead calf, maybe a coyote, but the shape was wrong, too soft, too still. A flicker of unease crawled up his spine. Trouble found men easily enough out here, and he'd learned not to invite it. He was about to nudge Jupiter onward when the wind caught a piece of fabric, dark, heavy, and fluttering weakly. It looked like a dress. Eli cursed under his breath. He turned Jupiter toward the creek and rode through the deepening snow. The closer he got, the more certain he became. It was a person. No, a woman. Face down in the snow, one arm flung out as if reaching for something that wasn't there. He dismounted, boots crunching loudly in the silence. Kneeling, he touched her shoulder, expecting the stiff resistance of death. Instead, the body yielded slightly under his hand. He rolled her over gently. Her face was pale blue, her lips darker still. Her hair, dark and tangled, was caked with snow and ice. She looked young once, before hardship carved its marks around her eyes and mouth. A faint, shallow breath escaped her lips, a ghost of air in the freezing wind. She was alive. Barely. He stood, his mind warring with itself. He didn't know her. A woman out here alone meant trouble, someone running from something, or someone. He could leave her. He could tell himself it wasn't his problem. It would be the smart thing, the safe thing. But then he saw the faint flutter of her pulse at her throat, fragile as a bird's wing. He thought of his sister Sarah, how the world had turned its back on her pain. He hadn't been there for her then. He couldn't walk away now. He unbuttoned his heavy coat, ignoring the slap of the cold wind against his chest, and wrapped it around her small frame. She was light as kindling. He lifted her carefully, her head falling against his shoulder. Her body was limp, but as he moved, she let out a weak, broken moan that tore through him like a blade. Getting her onto Jupiter was awkward and clumsy. The horse shifted uneasily, not used to carrying two, but Eli managed, settling her in front of him, her back resting against his chest. He could feel the faint, uneven rhythm of her breathing against him. He didn't know if he was saving her or just delaying her dying. The cabin came into view, its small window glowing with the last embers of the fire he'd left burning that morning. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and carried her inside. The sudden quiet and warmth hit like a wave. He laid her gently on the bearskin rug near the hearth. Her body looked small, fragile, half swallowed by his coat. He threw more logs on the fire until the flames leaped high, chasing the chill from the room. Then he knelt beside her and began removing her frozen boots. Her feet were like blocks of ice. The wool dress she wore was stiff with frost, soaked through and clinging to her like armor. When he reached for the buttons at her throat, her eyes flickered open. They were unfocused, glazed with fever. A weak hand gripped his wrist. "No!" she rasped, barely audible. "It's soaked through," he said gruffly. "You'll freeze to death if I don't." She didn't seem to hear. Her fingers clutched the front of the dress with desperate strength, terror flickering in her eyes. That fear, raw, instinctive, and pleading, made him stop. He didn't understand it, but he couldn't ignore it. He covered her with thick wool blankets instead, the damp dress still clinging beneath. He filled a kettle with water and hung it over the fire. Then he sat down in his chair across from her, watching. She drifted in and out of restless sleep, muttering things he couldn't make out. He stayed up all night feeding the fire, listening to her shallow breaths. Each one felt like a small battle won against the death waiting outside. For 3 days she hovered between life and death. Eli fed her broth, wiped her brow, spoke to her in quiet tones she probably couldn't hear. Sometimes she cried out in her sleep, words twisted by fever. On the 4th morning, she opened her eyes. He was sitting nearby, mending a torn glove. She looked at him for a long moment before whispering, "Where am I?" "You're safe," he said softly. "Wyoming territory, my ranch. I found you by the creek." She blinked, her gaze darting around the small room, assessing every corner like a frightened animal. When he asked her name, she hesitated so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she whispered, "Clara." The name fell like a secret. Over the next week, Clara grew stronger. She ate what he made without a word of thanks or complaint. She spoke little, moved quietly, and always kept distance between them. She avoided his eyes. The fear hadn't left her. It lived just beneath her skin, coiled and waiting. Eli didn't press her. He'd learned patience from the land. He gave her the bed and took the floor by the fire. He moved slowly, spoke softly. Still, she flinched at the sound of boots on wood, the sight of his shadow passing too close. He couldn't imagine what she'd been through, but he knew the look of someone running from something too big to name. And late at night, when the wind howled outside and she tossed in her sleep, clutching that heavy, shapeless dress to her chest, Eli Beckett lay awake by the fire and wondered what kind of horror had branded itself so deep in her soul that she couldn't even let a stranger remove the frost from her clothes. Days passed, and the snow outside deepened until the cabin seemed half swallowed by winter. Inside, warmth and quiet wrapped around them like fragile peace. Eli mended tack by the fire, his rough hands moving slow and steady. Clara sat across from him, wrapped in his thickest blanket, her hair tied back loosely, her eyes following his every motion without a word. She still kept her distance, but her silence was changing. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of someone trying to understand what safety felt like. She was healing, but not just from the cold. He saw it in small things. The way her hands stopped trembling when she took the tin mug of coffee, the way she no longer started at every sound. Still, she never removed that heavy wool dress beneath the blankets. She washed at the basin only when he was outside, always careful, always covered. The dress hung on her small frame like armor she dared not take off. He told himself it didn't matter. She'd talk when she was ready, but at night when she tossed and turned, clutching the fabric to her chest and murmuring words he couldn't make out. It gnawed at him, whatever that dress meant. It wasn't modesty. It was fear. One night a scream tore through the cabin. Not loud, but raw, animal, born from nightmares too real to fade. Eli shot up from his bedroll. Clara was huddled in the far corner, knees to her chest, sobbing into her hands. Her face was pale, her body shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Clara," he said softly, moving toward her. She flinched. Don't touch me." He stopped, his hands raised. "You're safe here," he said, voice low and calm. "No one's gonna hurt you." Quote. Her eyes darted to him, wild, haunted, but slowly the panic in them faded. She took a shuddering breath, then another. The sobs softened into quiet hiccups. Eli stayed where he was, giving her the space she needed. When she finally crawled back to the bed, she didn't look at him. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire, listening to the storm outside, and wondering what kind of man had done this to her. The next morning he found her standing at the small window, staring at the endless white outside. The pale light from the snow washed her face almost colorless. "The snows won't clear till spring," he said quietly. Could be 2, maybe 3 months. She didn't answer. You can stay here until then, he went on. I'll give you the cabin during the day. Take care of the chores outside. You'll be safe. That made her turn. For the first time, she really looked at him. Safe, she whispered, tasting the word like it was foreign. There's no such thing. Eli's jaw tightened. There is here. She studied him a long moment. Then she said, almost too soft to hear, I have no money. I'm not asking for any. Something flickered in her eyes, a struggle between disbelief and hope. Finally, she nodded. Until spring, she said. Then her voice trembled, raw and afraid. But you have to promise me something. What is it? Quote, you will never try to take off my dress. Her voice cracked, trembling but fierce. Swear it. Eli stared at her, caught off guard. Of all things he'd expected, this wasn't one. He saw the terror in her eyes, the way her hands gripped the fabric at her chest. It wasn't vanity. It was survival. I promise, he said, voice steady. I won't touch it. Some of the tension left her shoulders. She turned back to the window, and the conversation was over. From that day on, their strange rhythm began. She cooked, mended clothes, and read from the old Bible on his shelf. He worked the ranch, brought in wood, fixed harnesses. The cabin filled with the small sounds of shared life. The crackle of fire, the soft clink of dishes, the rustle of turning pages. They spoke little, but the silence between them had changed. Eli tried not to notice how her hair caught the firelight, or how her laughter, when it finally came, sounded like a song he hadn't heard in years. She started laughing one evening after he told her about a stubborn bull that had chased him across 3 miles of open prairie. It was just a quiet, breathy laugh, but it lit up her face, and he found himself smiling like a fool, forgetting the long winter pressing against the walls. That laugh was a small miracle. Later that night, they sat by the fire in companionable quiet. Clara stared into the flames, her voice low. You're a good man, Eli Beckett. He shook his head. I've just done what anyone would do. No, she said, looking at him, her gray eyes serious. Not anyone. He met her gaze, and something in his chest shifted. For years he'd lived with the ghosts of the past. His sister, the choices he hadn't made, the people he hadn't saved. But now, looking into the eyes of the woman who'd crawled back from death itself, he felt a spark of something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Hope. He took a slow breath. I had a sister, he said quietly. Her name was Sarah. She married a man everyone thought was decent. He wasn't. I tried to stop it, but no one listened. She died because no one believed her. His voice faltered, heavy with old pain. I swore I'd never turn away again. Not from anyone who needed help. Clara's eyes glistened. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She reached out, hesitating before laying her small hand over his. Her touch was trembling, light as a whisper, but it was enough. The cabin fell silent except for the fire's low hum. He turned his hand, lacing his fingers with hers. She didn't pull away. The warmth between them was fragile, uncertain, but real. For the first time since he'd found her in the snow, she wasn't a ghost. That night, a new storm swept down from the north. The wind howled around the cabin like a living thing. Inside, Clara woke again from a nightmare, her breath coming fast and shallow. Eli crossed the room quietly and sat beside her. She didn't shrink this time. When he spoke her name, she looked at him through tears and whispered, "Don't leave me." He didn't. He sat with her till morning, her head resting against his shoulder as the storm raged outside. When dawn came, he looked at her sleeping form by the fire, her face finally peaceful. And for the first time, Eli Beckett admitted the truth. He didn't just want to protect her. He needed her to live. The fever came without warning. One evening, Clara was quiet but calm, her cheeks touched with faint color. By midnight, she was burning. Her skin was slick with sweat, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Eli sat by her side, dipping a cloth into melted snow and pressing it to her forehead. Her eyes flickered beneath her lids, lost somewhere far away. She whispered fragments of words, names, places, apologies, but none of them made sense. He felt helpless. He'd fought blizzards and wild cattle, but he didn't know how to fight this. Her wool dress was damp with sweat clinging to her, trapping the heat in. The fever was cooking her alive. He sat back in the chair, staring at her. He'd promised her, sworn he'd never touch that dress. But promises meant nothing if she died under his roof. He tried to reason with himself. It was just fabric. It didn't matter. But his gut twisted. He knew it wasn't the dress. It was whatever horror it represented. Still, watching her body tremble and her lips crack from thirst, he knew there was no choice left. "I'm sorry," he muttered under his breath, "but I can't keep that promise." He leaned forward and unfastened the top button of the soaked wool. His fingers were clumsy, his chest tight. She didn't stir at first, lost to fever dreams. But when he reached the buttons at her waist, her eyes snapped open. They were glazed, but the terror in them was clear. Her hand twitched, weakly grabbing his wrist. "Please," she rasped, "don't take it off." The words stopped him cold. Her voice was so full of fear it sent a shiver through him. But then he saw it. A dark patch spreading across the fabric near her shoulder blade. Blood. His heart lurched. "You're hurt," he whispered. "You're bleeding." He hesitated only a moment longer, then continued, his movements gentle but firm. He eased the dress down her shoulders, ignoring her faint, broken sobs. The cloth came away slowly, heavy with sweat and fear. And then he froze. For a moment he couldn't breathe. The fire crackled behind him, but all sound fell away. Clara's back was a map of cruelty, long raised scars crossing over one another, some pale and healed, others red and raw. There were burns, too, round, puckered marks that told their own story. But what stopped him was the brand, burned into her right shoulder blade, a rough, crooked letter H inside a circle. The skin around it was red, cracked, bleeding again. Eli's throat closed. His stomach turned. The sight hit him harder than any fist ever could. The world tilted and steadied again around a white-hot rage that felt like fire in his veins. Whoever had done this didn't just hurt her. They tried to erase her humanity. He worked quietly, jaw tight. He cleaned the wound with trembling hands, spreading a little of his salve over the raw skin. He didn't speak, couldn't. When he was done, he covered her gently with a blanket and sat back down, staring into the fire until the light blurred in his eyes. She slept through the rest of the night. When dawn came, her fever broke. When she opened her eyes, he was sitting at the table, his rifle disassembled before him, hands moving automatically. She watched him for a long time before whispering, "You saw." He looked up slowly. "I saw." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't shed. "It was him," she said in a flat, lifeless tone. "Alistair Finch, a doctor, my fiancé." The name came out like poison. She told him everything. How the man had called himself a healer, but ran a private hospital for women no one cared about, women he used for his experiments. How she'd discovered his ledger, confronted him, and been locked away with his other victims. How they branded the ones who fought back, H for hysteric. Her voice didn't shake until she said, "There was a fire. One of the women said it. I escaped, but he's still out there." She looked at Eli, eyes hollow. "He'll come for me." Eli's jaw tightened. "Let him try." "No," she said sharply, the first flicker of life in her voice. "You don't understand. He's powerful. Men like him have the law on their side. He'll destroy you too." He stood. He destroyed enough. He won't touch you again. But the next morning, the bed was empty, her blanket folded neatly, her boots gone. Outside, faint footprints led toward the woods. She'd run again. Eli didn't think. He saddled Jupiter and followed. The snow was softening into mud, the world thawing. He found her collapsed near the creek, shivering, barely conscious. He lifted her into his arms, his coat wrapping them both. "I told you," she whispered weakly. "I'll only bring you trouble." He held her closer. "Then trouble's what I'll take." He carried her home. That night, he cleaned her reopened wounds again. This time she didn't resist. Her body trembled, but not from fear. When he touched her, it was gentle, reverent. A touch meant to heal, not to claim. For the first time, she didn't flinch. As the fire crackled, something shifted between them. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of understanding. Later, when she turned to him, her eyes searching his, he saw something else there. Trust. And when he kissed her, it wasn't out of pity, it was out of love. The thaw came slow, and with it, the past caught up. 3 riders appeared one morning, Finch and 2 of his hired men. Clara saw them first from the window, her face going pale. Eli took his rifle from the wall. "Get the pistol," he said calmly. "Stay back." Finch dismounted, his fine black coat dusted with snow. "Mr. Beckett!" he called, voice smooth as oil. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Eli stepped onto the porch. "She doesn't belong to anyone." Finch's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My wife is unwell. She needs my care." Clara stepped up beside Eli. Her voice was steady, clear. "My name is Clara, and I am not your wife." Quote. The doctor's mask cracked, revealing the cruelty beneath. "You foolish girl," he hissed. "Take them!" The gunfire came fast. Eli's rifle roared once, dropping the first man. Clara's pistol flashed, her shot hitting the brute who had branded her. He fell hard into the snow, lifeless. Finch's horse reared. He turned and fled toward the trees. Clara was already moving. She mounted Jupiter bareback, snow spraying as she gave chase. Eli shouted her name, but she was gone, riding into the storm of her past. She found Finch near the frozen creek, his horse stuck, his face white with fear. He tried to beg, his lies stumbling over each other. She raised the pistol, her hand trembling. But before she could decide, before the nightmare could repeat itself, another shot cracked through the trees. Finch dropped. Eli stood behind her, rifle smoking. His eyes were full of pain, not triumph. "It's over," he said softly. Clara dropped the gun and fell to her knees, sobbing. "I didn't want to be like them," she cried. "I didn't want to become what they made me." Quote. He knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. "You didn't," he whispered. "You survived." That's not the same thing. They buried the men by the river and set fire to what remained. The flames roared high, consuming the past. Spring came, and with it, peace. The land thawed. Flowers grew around the graves. Clara made a new dress from pale blue calico, simple and modest, sewn by her own hand. She wore it one morning when Eli found her outside, standing in the sunlight. Her hair was loose, her eyes calm. "You know," he said softly, "you don't have to wear the dress anymore." She smiled faintly. "I know, but this one I made for myself." They walked together through the green valley, past the graves and down toward the river. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. For the first time in years, she felt free. "I think I'm ready to live now," she said quietly. Eli took her hand, their fingers intertwining. "Then let's live," he said. And in that wild, reborn Wyoming valley, beneath a sky the color of peace, 2 broken souls finally found what the world had long denied them. Not survival, but home.